Anna Carter's heart pounded against her ribs like a war drum as rough hands dragged her toward the idling van. The stench of leather, motor oil, and cigarettes filled her nostrils as the larger of the two bikers tightened his grip on her arm. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled on the gravel driveway, her pink sneakers scraping helplessly against the ground. "Quit struggling, kid," growled the second man, his face partially obscured by a matted beard and dark sunglasses despite the night hour. The moonlight glinted off the skull-shaped rings adorning his fingers as he reached for the van's rear door. "Nobody's coming to help you now." From somewhere in the darkness beyond the harsh circle of the van's headlights came a sound low, guttural, and unmistakable, a growl that started deep and rose in volume until it seemed to vibrate the very air. The bikers froze. Anna's breath caught in her throat as she glimpsed two burning amber eyes materializing from the shadows, followed by the massive silhouette of her German shepherd, his teeth bared in a snarl that promised violence. Major had arrived, and in that moment, Anna knew everything was about to change. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Carters were the kind of family that seemed to embody the American dream in the small town of Ridgewood. James Carter, at 45, carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen too much. A decorated Gulf War veteran turned firefighter, his broad shoulders bore the invisible weight of PTSD that sometimes woke him screaming in the night. Only those closest to him knew how the war had hollowed parts of him out, leaving scars that ran deeper than the burn mark stretching across his left forearm. His wife Laura, a gentle-voiced elementary school teacher with auburn hair that caught the sunlight, devoted her weekends to the local animal shelter. Few knew of the childhood trauma that made her hands tremble slightly whenever a dog barked too suddenly, a secret she'd kept even from James, masking her occasional unease around their own pet with a practiced smile. Their daughter Anna, just 9 years old, had inherited her father's determined chin and her mother's compassionate eyes. Named after James's brother who had died in combat before she was born, Anna possessed a sensitivity that sometimes worried her parents. She spent hours drawing elaborate pictures of animals, particularly their beloved German shepherd, in a sketchbook her father had given her for her last birthday. Her small bedroom walls were covered with these drawings, colorful testaments to her artistic soul. Major hadn't started out as Major. 6 years ago, during a warehouse fire on the outskirts of town, James had discovered the trembling German shepherd puppy, smoke-stained and terrified, huddled beneath a fallen beam. Something in the dog's desperate eyes had connected with James's own brokenness. Against protocol, he'd tucked the puppy inside his turnout coat and carried him to safety. Named after James's fallen war buddy, Major soon became more than a pet, he became salvation. The nightmares that had plagued James began to recede when Major slept at the foot of the bed, his watchful presence a sentinel against the darkness in James's mind. For Anna, Major was confidant, playmate, and protector rolled into one loyal package of fur and devotion. Their bond transcended words, built on silent understanding and absolute trust. Ridgewood itself was a town of American flags and Friday night football games, where neighbors still brought casseroles during times of trouble. But beneath its Norman Rockwell veneer ran undercurrents of division. Principal Margaret Thompson managed Ridgewood Elementary with firm efficiency, her silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Sheriff Bill Reynolds, with his weathered face and kind eyes, championed animal rights causes when not enforcing the law, while his deputy, Mark Wilson, Laura's overprotective brother, harbored deep skepticism toward animals after responding to too many dog attack calls. And then there was Frank Miller, whose property bordered the Carters. The neighborhood knew his story, a son lost to a vicious dog attack 15 years ago, but few mentioned it to his face, especially when he glared at Major across the fence line, the resentment burning in his eyes like banked coals. Every weekday morning in Ridgewood followed the same comfortable rhythm for Anna Carter and Major. By 7:30 a.m. they would set off down Maple Street, Anna's yellow backpack bouncing slightly with each step, Major padding faithfully beside her without a leash. He didn't need one. 6 years of companionship had forged an understanding between them that transcended commands or restraints. When Anna paused at the crosswalk, Major sat without prompting. When she quickened her pace, Excited about reaching the school playground early to meet her friends, Major matched her stride for stride, his alert eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "You know, boy," Anna would often whisper to him, bending down to ruffle the thick fur around his neck, "I think you understand every single word I say." And sometimes the way Major tilted his head and fixed her with those intelligent amber eyes, Anna was certain he did understand not just her words, but her feelings, her fears, and her 9-year-old dreams that seemed so important and so fragile. The teachers at Ridgewood Elementary had long since grown accustomed to the sight of the massive German shepherd sitting with sphinx-like patience at the edge of school property. Major never crossed the invisible boundary line where the sidewalk met the school grounds proper, respecting a border no one had ever formally established. At 3:15 p.m., when the final bell rang, he would rise from his sentinel position, tail beginning to wag the moment the school doors opened and children streamed out. He always spotted Anna first, even in the chaos of dismissal, and she always ran to him, dropping to her knees to wrap her arms around his thick neck while he nuzzled her hair. The twin souls reconnected after hours apart. Their afternoons together followed well-worn paths of ritual and play. Anna would tell Major about her day, the math test she'd aced, the lunch table drama with Madison and Taylor, the story Mrs. Wilson, her mother and third-grade teacher, had read to the class. Major would listen with perked ears and occasional soft whines that Anna interpreted as questions or commentary. They would stop at the small creek that ran behind Elm Street Park, where Anna collected interesting rocks and Major splashed in the shallow water, sending minnows darting for cover. Sometimes they'd visit old Mrs. Henderson, who always had dog biscuits for Major and oatmeal cookies for Anna. On rainy days they'd race home, Anna squealing with delight as they both arrived soaked on the porch, Major shaking vigorously and spraying water everywhere while Anna collapsed in giggles. It was a childhood as idyllic as a Norman Rockwell painting, innocent, protected, safe in the bubble of small-town America where everyone knew everyone else, where doors remained unlocked, and where parents still allowed their children to walk home alone because nothing truly bad ever happened in Ridgewood. Until it almost did. The change came on a Tuesday in late September, when summer's warmth had begun to surrender to autumn's cooler embrace. Dark storm clouds had been gathering all afternoon, turning the 3:00 sky an ominous slate gray. Most parents had driven to pick up their children anticipating the downpour, but Laura had a faculty meeting, and James was on shift at the firehouse. Anna had assured her mother she and Major would be fine walking home. They'd beaten rainstorms before. The school hallways had emptied quickly as children hurried home ahead of the weather. Anna had lingered, helping her mother organize reading materials for the next day, and by the time she stepped outside, the playground was deserted. A strong gust of wind whipped her ponytail across her face, and thunder rumbled in the distance, a bass drum announcing the coming storm. "Major?" Anna called, expectation turning to confusion when she didn't immediately spot the familiar shape of her guardian. For 6 years, he had never once failed to be waiting for her. She scanned the school perimeter with growing concern, her small fingers tightening on the straps of her backpack. When she finally saw him, her relief quickly transformed into unease. Major stood at the far edge of the school grounds, his body rigid as a statue, facing away from her toward the street beyond. Even from a distance, Anna could see the unusual posture, hackles raised, head low, tail straight rather than wagging in greeting. Something was wrong. "Major?" she called again, softer this time, uncertain. The German shepherd's ears twitched at her voice, but he didn't turn. A low, continuous growl emanated from him, barely audible above the wind but unmistakable in its warning. Anna cautiously approached, the hairs on her own arms rising in instinctive response to Major's alarm. As she drew closer, she followed his fixed gaze across the street where the school property ended and a stand of oak trees began. There, partially concealed in the deepening shadows beneath the foliage, was a motorcycle, a large black and chrome machine that seemed to crouch like a predatory beast. Beside it stood a figure, tall and still, watching the school, watching her. The stranger wore a leather jacket, despite the warm day, dark jeans, and heavy boots. A black helmet obscured his features, its mirrored visor reflecting what little light remained in the stormy afternoon. He made no movement, no acknowledgement of being spotted, yet Anna felt with absolute certainty that his eyes were locked on her from behind that impenetrable shield. "Come on, boy," Anna whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she reached for Major's collar. "Let's go home." But Major wouldn't budge. The growl deepened, rumbling through his powerful chest like distant thunder, a sound Anna had never heard him make before. It wasn't the playful warning he gave when they played tug-of-war or the irritated grumble when neighborhood cats crossed their yard. This was something primal and fierce, a sound that said danger. The figure by the motorcycle shifted slightly, one gloved hand reaching toward the handlebars. Major's growl escalated into a sudden volley of sharp, aggressive barks that sliced through the pre-storm silence. The force of his warning lunges pulled Anna forward a step before she managed to brace herself. "Major, stop," she pleaded, frightened not by her dog but by the intensity of his reaction. Across the street, the helmeted figure paused, then deliberately turned away, mounting the motorcycle with slow, measured movements. The engine roared to life, an angry mechanical snarl answering Major's natural one. Without looking back, the rider pulled away, disappearing around the corner as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Only then did Major's posture relax slightly, though he remained watchful, tracking the sound of the motorcycle long after it had faded from human hearing. Anna stood frozen, the rain beginning to soak through her light jacket, her heart pounding with an inexplicable fear she couldn't name. "Who was that, Major?" she whispered. "Why were you so angry?" Major finally turned to her, pressing his body against her legs in a protective stance that would remain his default position all the way home. By the time they reached the Carter house, the storm had broken in earnest. They burst through the front door as lightning cracked overhead, both of them dripping puddles onto the entryway floor. On any other day, Anna would have laughed at Major's bedraggled appearance, his usually proud fur plastered comically to his body. Today she just stood shivering, her mind replaying the image of the silent watcher by the trees. "Anna?" Laura called from the kitchen, having arrived home just minutes earlier. "Is that you, honey? You're soaked. Go change before you catch cold." Anna obeyed automatically, but as she turned toward the stairs, she noticed that Major hadn't followed as he usually would. Instead, he remained by the front door, his body still tense, ears flicking toward every sound from outside despite the noise of the rain hammering against the roof. Later that evening, as James returned from his shift and the family gathered for dinner, Anna tried to explain what had happened. "There was a man watching the school, Dad," she said, pushing her meatloaf around her plate, "and on a motorcycle. Major got really mad at him." James and Laura exchanged quick glances across the table. "What kind of man, sweetheart?" James asked, his voice carefully casual while his eyes sharpened with sudden attention. Anna shrugged. "I couldn't see his face. He had a helmet on. But Major knew something was wrong. He kept growling and barking until the man went away." "He was probably just waiting for someone," Laura suggested, though her smile seemed forced. "Or maybe he was lost and checking his directions." "No," Anna insisted with the certainty of a child who trusts her own observations. "He was watching me. And Major knew it was bad." From his place beside Anna's chair, Major raised his head at the mention of his name. Throughout dinner he had remained unusually alert, his eyes frequently moving to the windows despite the closed blinds, his ears continuously adjusting to track sounds beyond human perception. "Well," James said finally, reaching down to stroke Major's head, "that's why we have this big guy, isn't it? To keep an eye out for anything strange." But that night, long after Anna had been tucked into bed, James double-checked every lock in the house, a habit from his military days that had faded over years of small-town security but returned with unexpected urgency. In the master bedroom, Laura lay awake, listening to the storm gradually subside while her mind conjured images of strangers watching her daughter. "Do you think we should be worried?" she whispered into the darkness. James didn't immediately answer. Outside their window, the rain had dwindled to a gentle patter, the earlier violence of the storm replaced by a soft, persistent drizzle. Probably nothing, he said finally. Kids have big imaginations. And Major's protective could have been anyone setting him off. But you locked all the doors. James sighed. Force of habit. They both knew it wasn't. Downstairs, Major had abandoned his usual sleeping spot at the foot of Anna's bed. Instead, he lay across the threshold of the front door, his head on his paws, but his eyes open, keeping watch through the night as the storm passed and silence settled over Ridgewood once more. Something had changed in his ordered world, a threat had entered his territory, and the German shepherd's ancient instincts, honed through centuries of breeding for protection, had awakened to a singular purpose. Nothing would harm his family, especially not the child who had held him as a smoke-stained puppy and whispered that everything would be all right. Outside, unseen in the darkness beyond the streetlight's reach, a motorcycle rolled slowly past the Carter house, its engine muffled to a low rumble that blended with the residual thunder. The rider paused briefly, studying the darkened windows, before continuing unhurriedly down the rain-slick street and disappearing into the night. The next afternoon arrived with that particular golden quality of autumn light that transforms ordinary scenes into paintings. The storm had cleared the air, leaving behind a crispness that hinted at the coming fall. For Anna, however, the beauty of the day was overshadowed by a persistent unease that had followed her through restless dreams. Even at school, she found herself glancing repeatedly toward the windows, half expecting to see a helmeted figure watching from across the street. When the final bell rang, she burst through the doors with unusual urgency, relief flooding through her at the sight of Major waiting faithfully at his usual spot. "You're here," she whispered, burying her face in his fur. Major responded with a gentle nudge of his nose against her cheek, but Anna noticed immediately that something was different. His body carried the same tension as yesterday, his focus shifting continuously toward the road rather than giving her his usual undivided attention. She followed his gaze and felt her stomach tighten. Not one motorcycle this time, but two. They were parked a block further down than yesterday, partially concealed behind the community bulletin board at the corner of Elm and Maple. Even from this distance, Anna could make out the riders, one tall and broad-shouldered like yesterday's watcher, the other shorter but with the same stillness, and the same sense of patient observation. Neither had removed their helmets. "They're back," Anna said, her fingers instinctively tightening in Major's fur. The German shepherd's growl began low in his chest, a warning vibration that Anna could feel through her hand. Other children streamed past them, laughing and chattering, oblivious to what Anna and Major had noticed. Mrs. Henderson, the crossing guard, waved cheerfully from her post, her attention on a group of kindergartners navigating the crosswalk. "Come on, boy," Anna said, tugging gently at Major's collar. "Let's go home." But as they began to move, Anna noticed that the two motorcyclists had started their engines. They pulled away from the curb with deliberate slowness, turning to follow the same route Anna would take home. Major saw it too. Without warning, the German shepherd lunged forward with such force that Anna's grip on his collar slipped. In an explosion of speed and power, Major charged across the schoolyard toward the motorcycles, his snarls transforming into full-throated barks that rang like warning bells through the quiet neighborhood. "Major, no!" Anna screamed, running after him. The motorcyclists, seeing 80 pounds of determined German shepherd barreling toward them, reacted with alarm. The shorter one accelerated quickly, speeding away down Maple Street, but the larger rider hesitated. Major reached him just as he began to move, powerful jaws clamping onto the man's heavy boots still resting on the ground. The cyclist shouted in surprise and pain, trying to kick free while maintaining balance on the heavy machine. "Go off your dog," he yelled, his voice muffled by the helmet but the panic in it unmistakable. By now, parents waiting for their children had noticed the commotion. Mrs. Henderson abandoned her crossing post and hurried toward the scene, her orange safety vest flapping. "What on earth is going on?" she demanded. That dog attacked out of nowhere. The motorcyclist shouted, finally breaking free of Major's grip. He gunned the engine, nearly losing control before riding the motorcycle and speeding away after his companion. Major stood his ground, barking after the retreating figures until they disappeared from sight. Only then did he return to Anna's side, his manner clearly agitated, scanning the street as if expecting the strangers to return at any moment. A small crowd had gathered. Anna found herself surrounded by concerned adults, their voices overlapping in a confusing chorus. "Did you see that? The dog just went crazy. Who were those men? I've never seen them around here. That Carter dog is dangerous. I've always said it was too big. The poor child could have been dragged into traffic." Mrs. Henderson placed a protective arm around Anna's shoulders. "Are you all right, dear? What happened?" "Those men," Anna tried to explain, her voice trembling. "They were watching me yesterday, too. Major was trying to protect me." But in the growing commotion, her small voice was drowned out. By the time Deputy Mark Wilson arrived in his patrol car, responding to a call about a dog attack, the narrative had already solidified among the witnesses, but an unprovoked aggressive act by an oversized dog that could have seriously injured someone. Mark's face darkened when he realized whose dog was involved. His relationship with his brother-in-law, James, had always been strained, particularly over James's insistence on keeping what Mark considered a potentially dangerous animal. Now, as he took statements from agitated parents, his expression grew increasingly grim. "Anna," he said finally, kneeling to her level but keeping a wary distance from Major, "I need you to explain exactly what happened." Anna tried again, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "There were men watching me yesterday and today. They followed me on motorcycles. Major was protecting me, Uncle Mark. He knew they were bad." Mark's expression softened slightly at his niece's distress, but his eyes remained skeptical. "Did these men speak to you? Did they approach you or threaten you in any way?" "No, but—" "And did Major attack without being provoked today?" "He didn't attack. He was keeping them away from me." Mark sighed, rising to his full height. "I understand you're upset. Anna, why don't I drive you home? We need to talk with your parents about this." The scene that unfolded in the Carters' living room an hour later would be revisited in Anna's nightmares for weeks to come. Her mother, still in her teaching clothes, sat rigid on the edge of the sofa, her face pale. James stood by the fireplace, his posture military straight, jaw clenched as Mark delivered what he called the facts of the situation. "This isn't just about today, James," Mark was saying, his official deputy's tone barely masking the family tension underneath. "There have been other complaints. Frank Miller says your dog growls every time he sets foot in his own backyard. The Peterson boy is afraid to deliver newspapers to your house." "Major has never hurt anyone," James said, his voice controlled but tight. "Not once in 6 years." "He attacked a man today," Mark countered. "He grabbed a man's boot," James corrected. "A stranger who Anna says has been watching her. Doesn't that concern you more than a dog doing exactly what he's supposed to do, protecting a child?" Mark glanced at Anna, his expression a mixture of affection and doubt. "Anna is 9, James. Children her age often misinterpret things. These were probably just guys passing through town. The same guys 2 days in a row watching the elementary school." Laura spoke up, her teacher's instincts warring with her brother's dismissal. "That doesn't strike you as suspicious?" Mark shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not saying we won't look into it. But right now we have a more immediate issue. Principal Thompson called while I was on my way here. The school board held an emergency session this afternoon after receiving multiple calls from concerned parents." Anna felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. Beside her, Major sensed her distress and pressed closer, his warm body a comforting presence against her leg. "What kind of emergency session?" James demanded. Mark withdrew an official-looking envelope from his jacket pocket. "This is from the board. I said I'd deliver it personally." His voice softened slightly. "I'm sorry, Laura. I tried to argue against it." Laura's hands trembled as she opened the letter. Her eyes scanned the page, filling with tears. "They banned Major from school property," she whispered. "Effective immediately. They're citing the county dangerous animal ordinance." "That's ridiculous," James exploded. "Based on what?" "One incident where he didn't even hurt anyone." "Based on multiple witness statements describing aggressive behavior," Mark replied stiffly. "And Principal Thompson's responsibility to ensure student safety." "What about Anna's safety?" James demanded. "Who's going to watch out for her with these mysterious motorcyclists hanging around?" "I've already said we'll increase patrols around the school," Mark said. "But you need to keep that dog under control, James. If there's another incident, the county could demand he be surrendered for evaluation. You know what that means." The unspoken threat hung in the air. Surrender for evaluation was often the first step toward euthanasia for dogs deemed dangerous. Anna felt the blood drain from her face. "No," she cried, throwing her arms around Major's neck. "They can't take him away. Dad, don't let him." "Nobody's taking Major anywhere," James assured her, though the shadow that crossed his face betrayed his concern. "Deputy Wilson is just explaining the rules. Isn't that right, Mark?" Mark had the grace to look uncomfortable under his brother-in-law's hard stare. "Just keep him leashed and away from school," he said finally. "And maybe consider some professional training." After Mark left, an uncomfortable silence descended on the Carter household. Laura moved mechanically to prepare dinner, though no one had much appetite. James made a series of phone calls to Sheriff Reynolds, to a lawyer friend in the next county, to Principal Thompson herself, though she didn't answer. Anna sat on the back porch steps, her arms around Major, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that would normally have inspired her to reach for her sketchbook. Tonight, however, her artistic impulses were buried beneath waves of fear and injustice. "It's not fair," she whispered into Major's fur. "You were just protecting me. Why doesn't anyone believe us?" That night, long after Anna had finally fallen into troubled sleep, James and Laura argued in hushed, tense voices in their bedroom. "We have to consider all the options," Laura said, pacing the small space between bed and dresser. "What if Mark is right? What if Major did overreact?" "You can't seriously believe that," James responded, incredulity sharpening his tone. "You've known that dog since he was a puppy. You've seen how gentle he is with Anna." "I know," but Laura hesitated, then continued in a rush. "I've been talking with Dr. Harrison at the veterinary clinic. There's a training center in Millfield that specializes in behavior modification. Maybe if we sent Major there for a few weeks." "You want to send him away?" James's voice rose, despite his effort to keep quiet. "Based on one incident that was probably completely justified?" "I'm just trying to find a solution that keeps everyone safe," Laura shot back, "including Major. If something else happens, we could lose him completely." "So your answer is to ship him off to strangers. Break Anna's heart and remove the one thing that's actually keeping her safe if she's right about these men?" "We don't know she's right." Laura's composure finally cracked. "She's 9 years old, James. Her imagination didn't make Major act the way he did," James cut in. "That dog knows something we don't, and I trust his instincts." Neither of them noticed the small figure standing in the darkened hallway, listening to every word, tears streaming silently down her face. Anna crept back to her room, crawling under the covers where Major lay beside her bed. She buried her face in his fur, feeling betrayed not just by the school and the town, but now by her mother too. "I won't let them take you away," she whispered fiercely. "I promise." Major whined softly, licking away her tears, his warm presence the only constant in a world that suddenly seemed filled with shadows and uncertainties. Outside, far down the street, but drawing inexorably closer, motorcycle engines rumbled quietly in the night. The following morning dawned with a cruel brightness that seemed to mock Anna's distress. For the first time in years, she faced the prospect of walking to school alone. Standing at the front door, backpack slung over her shoulders, she looked down at Major sitting attentively before her. his amber eyes fixed on her face with what she could only interpret as confusion. "I have to go alone today, boy," she explained, her voice catching. "You can't come with me anymore." Major tilted his head, ears perked forward, clearly not understanding this abrupt change to their established routine. When Anna reached for the doorknob, he rose automatically, ready to follow. "No, Major. Stay." The command felt like a betrayal on her tongue. Major's ears flattened slightly, his posture conveying a distinct disappointment that made Anna's eyes fill with tears again. James appeared in the hallway, his firefighter uniform already on for his early shift. "I can drive you today, sweetheart," he offered, noting her distress. Anna shook her head stubbornly. "I can walk. I'm not a baby." Behind her father, she could see her mother watching from the kitchen doorway, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. The overheard conversation from the previous night still stung, leaving Anna reluctant to accept comfort from either parent. "At least let me walk you halfway," James insisted. "I'm heading in that direction anyway." They left Major whining behind the closed door, his nails scratching against the wood in protest. The sound followed Anna down the front path, each scrape and whimper an accusation that she was abandoning her most faithful companion. As they walked, James attempted to explain what was happening in terms Anna could understand. "It's just temporary, Anna, until we can get this misunderstanding sorted out." "It's not a misunderstanding," Anna insisted, kicking at a pile of fallen leaves. "Those men were watching me. Major knew it." James studied his daughter's face, troubled by the certainty he saw there. "Did they ever speak to you? Come close to you?" "No, they just watched." But it felt, Anna struggled to articulate the sensation. "It felt wrong, Dad. Like when you touch something hot and know you should pull your hand away." James nodded slowly. His military training had taught him to respect such instincts. They had saved his life more than once in Iraq. "I believe you, Anna," he said finally. "And I'm going to look into it, I promise." At the corner where their route to school diverged from his path to the firehouse, James knelt to Anna's level. "Stay with your friends today. Don't go anywhere alone. And I'll be here to pick you up after school." Anna nodded, but as she continued toward Ridgewood Elementary alone, she couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that Major's absence created, like missing a limb or walking into bright sunlight without sunglasses. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, scanning parked cars and side streets for any sign of motorcycles or helmeted figures. The school day passed in a distracted blur. Twice Anna's teacher had to repeat questions when she was caught staring out the window instead of paying attention to the lesson. During recess, while other children played tag and jumped rope in the crisp autumn air, Anna stayed close to the building, her back against the brick wall, but watching the perimeter of the schoolyard with wary eyes. Her vigilance was rewarded, or perhaps her fears confirmed, when she spotted a black motorcycle cruising slowly past the school fence during lunch period. The rider didn't stop, but Anna was certain he turned his helmeted head toward the playground as he passed. She immediately reported it to the recess monitor, who listened with forced patience before suggesting that Anna was seeing things because of yesterday's excitement. By the time the final bell rang, Anna's nerves were stretched to breaking point. She burst through the front doors, eyes desperately searching for her father's familiar figure. Instead, she saw her mother's blue sedan idling at the curb. "Your dad got called to an emergency," Laura explained as Anna climbed into the back seat. "A brush fire out on County Road 8. "Did you see any motorcycles?" Anna asked immediately, fastening her seatbelt with trembling fingers. Laura's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "No, honey." After a pause, she added more gently, "Anna, I know you're upset about Major, but we need to be careful about seeing danger everywhere." "I'm not making it up," Anna protested, fresh tears springing to her eyes. "Why won't anyone believe me?" Laura sighed, meeting her daughter's gaze in the rearview mirror. "It's not that I don't believe you're seeing something, sweetheart. But sometimes our minds can play tricks on us when we're scared or upset." The rest of the drive home passed in strained silence. When they arrived, Major greeted them with frantic enthusiasm, circling Anna and sniffing her thoroughly as if checking for injuries. His relief at her safe return was palpable, making the imposed separation seem even more cruel and unnecessary. While Anna retreated to her room with Major, Laura began dinner preparations, the familiar routine offering some comfort in the midst of family tension. She was chopping vegetables when the doorbell rang. Opening the front door, she found Sheriff Bill Reynolds standing on her porch, hat in hand. "Afternoon, Laura," he said, his weathered face creased with concern. "Got a minute to talk?" In the living room, Sheriff Reynolds declined Laura's offer of coffee, getting straight to the point. "James called me this morning, told me about these motorcycle fellows Anna's been seeing. Asked me to look into it." Hope flared briefly in Laura's chest. "Did you find something?" "Not exactly," the sheriff admitted, "but I've been making some calls to neighboring counties. There's been reports of a motorcycle gang passing through the area. Nothing definite on what they're up to, but—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "There have been some concerns about trafficking activity in the region." "Trafficking?" Laura repeated the word, sending a chill down her spine. "You mean?" "Nothing's confirmed," Reynolds interjected quickly. "Could be drugs, could be something else. Point is, I'm taking James's concerns seriously. I've arranged for additional patrols around the school and your neighborhood." Laura sank onto the sofa, her earlier skepticism wavering. "You really think Anna might have seen something?" "Children often notice things adults miss," Reynolds said simply. "And I've known that dog of yours since he was a pup. Major's got good instincts." After the sheriff left, Laura stood at the kitchen window, watching the lengthening shadows across their backyard, her mind replaying the conversation. The possibility that Anna's fears might be justified filled her with a sickening dread. Maybe they had all been too quick to dismiss her stories. Meanwhile, across town, James Carter was finding it difficult to focus on his work. Between emergency calls, he'd been making inquiries of his own, reaching out to former military contacts and friends in neighboring fire departments. By mid-afternoon, he'd managed to confirm what Sheriff Reynolds had discovered: reports of a motorcycle gang with possible connections to a trafficking network had been circulating among law enforcement agencies throughout the county. During a brief break, James found himself parked near Ridgewood Elementary, watching as children streamed out of the building at day's end. His trained eye immediately spotted something out of place: a black SUV with tinted windows idling at the far end of the school's drop-off lane. As James observed, a motorcycle appeared from a side street, passing the SUV slowly. The driver gave a subtle hand signal that wouldn't have been noticeable to anyone not specifically watching for it. James's heart rate accelerated. Without conscious thought, he reached for his phone and began taking pictures of both vehicles, capturing license plates in as much detail as possible through his zoom lens. The motorcycle rider must have noticed, because he suddenly accelerated away from the scene. The SUV followed moments later, moving with careful normality but clearly departing in haste. That evening, the Carter household hummed with tense energy. James arrived home late, his face grim, as he shared his observations with Laura after Anna had gone to bed. He spread the hastily printed photographs across the kitchen table. "It's a coordinated effort," he explained, pointing to the images. "The motorcycles are scouts. They identify potential targets, then report back. The SUV would be for transport." He couldn't bring himself to say what kind of transport. The words child abduction too horrible to voice in his own home. Laura's face had gone pale. "I should have believed her from the start," she whispered, the realization of how close their daughter might have come to danger washing over her like ice water. "We both should have," James agreed, "but Major did. That's what matters." Upstairs, Anna lay awake in her darkened bedroom, Major a warm, protective presence beside her bed. Despite her parents' efforts to speak quietly, fragments of their conversation had drifted up through the heating vent, enough for her to understand that finally someone was taking her fears seriously. The vindication should have been comforting, but instead it only intensified her sense of dread. She reached down to stroke Major's head, drawing strength from his solid presence. "You were right all along," she murmured. Major looked up at her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than any animal should. He'd been restless all evening, frequently moving to the windows to stare out into the darkness, his body language communicating a vigilance that mirrored Anna's own unease. Later that night, a town meeting was hastily convened at Ridgewood's community center. Despite the late notice, the room was packed with concerned parents, teachers, and citizens, the buzz of anxious conversation filling the air like static electricity before a storm. Principal Thompson stood at the podium, her silver hair pulled back in its customary severe bun, her expression troubled as she addressed the gathering. "We've called this emergency meeting to discuss some security concerns that have been brought to our attention." In the third row, Frank Miller rose to his feet before she could continue. "This is about that Carter dog, isn't it? I warned everyone that animal was dangerous." A murmur of agreement rippled through one section of the audience. "Actually, Mr. Miller," Sheriff Reynolds interjected, stepping forward, "this meeting is about a potential threat to the children of this community, one that the Carter dog apparently recognized before any of us." James took his cue, moving to the front of the room with his photographs and evidence. As he began to explain what he and the sheriff had uncovered, the mood in the room transformed from skepticism to alarm. Parents exchanged frightened glances. Several mothers instinctively reached for their children, pulling them closer. "Are you saying there are child abductors targeting our town?" someone called out. "We don't have definitive proof," Sheriff Reynolds cautioned, "but there's enough evidence to warrant increased security measures." "What about the dog?" Frank Miller demanded, unmollified. "It attacked a man in public." "That man has been identified as Roland Meeks," Reynolds replied grimly. "He has outstanding warrants in 3 states, including charges related to child exploitation." A shocked silence fell over the room. "So the dog was right," someone murmured, the words echoed by others around the room. Laura, sitting in the front row with Anna beside her, reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it tightly. "I'm so sorry I doubted you," she whispered. On Anna's other side, Deputy Mark Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The official who had delivered the ban on Major now faced with evidence that the German Shepherd's actions had been not just justified but potentially life-saving. As the meeting continued, voices raised in argument about the best course of action. Some, led by animal rights activists who had rushed to defend Major once the full story emerged, demanded the immediate rescinding of the school ban. Others, including Frank Miller and his supporters, maintained that a dangerous animal was still dangerous, regardless of the circumstances. Through it all, Anna sat quietly, the adults' voices washing over her in waves of sound that seemed distant and unimportant compared to the certainty she'd carried all along. The Major had known the truth from the beginning. She only wished she'd been able to make the grown-ups understand sooner. Outside the community center, unseen by the distracted townsfolk, a black motorcycle rolled slowly past, and its rider noting the gathering with interest before continuing on into the night. A predator temporarily thwarted but not deterred, patience its most dangerous weapon. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn splendor, maple and oak trees blazing with red and gold against a cloudless blue sky. In the Carter household, the morning passed with an uneasy normalcy. James and Laura moved through their weekend routines with heightened vigilance, checking and rechecking doors and windows, exchanging meaningful glances whenever Anna was out of sight for more than a few minutes. The school ban against Major remained in effect despite the revelations at the town meeting, with bureaucratic processes moving far too slowly in the face of what the Carters now recognized as an imminent threat. By mid-afternoon, James received an urgent call from the fire station. "Brush fire out by Old Miller Road," he explained to Laura, already reaching for his keys. "Sounds bad they're calling in everyone." Laura nodded tensely. "We'll be fine. Sheriff Reynolds said he'd have a deputy drive by every hour." James hesitated at the door, clearly torn between duty and family. "Keep everything locked. Don't let Anna out of your sight." "I won't," Laura promised. "Be careful." After James departed, Laura busied herself with laundry while Anna sat at the kitchen table, coloring meticulously in her sketchbook. Major lay beside her chair, his position allowing him to watch both Anna and the back door simultaneously. The rhythmic scratch of Anna's colored pencils and the steady rumble of the dryer in the laundry room created an illusion of peaceful domesticity that belied the tension thrumming just beneath the surface. "Mom," Anna called, holding up her latest drawing. "Look what I made for Major." Laura moved to the doorway, smiling at the detailed portrait of the German Shepherd rendered in careful strokes of amber and black. "That's beautiful, honey. You've really captured his eyes." "He's my hero," Anna said simply, returning to her work. Laura's throat tightened. "Yes, he certainly is." She checked her watch, nearly 4 o'clock. "I need to run these sheets upstairs. Will you be okay for just a minute?" Anna nodded, not looking up from her drawing. Major's ears twitched at Laura's movement, but he remained dutifully at Anna's side as Laura gathered the folded linens and headed upstairs. The attack came with a swiftness that later seemed impossible to comprehend. One moment the house was quiet save for the background hum of appliances and Anna's soft humming. The next, the back door splintered open with a crash that sent Major to his feet in an instant, his warning bark cutting through the peaceful afternoon like a siren. Two men burst through the shattered doorframe, both clad in leather jackets emblazoned with the same skull insignia that had been captured in James's surveillance photos. The first man, tall and broad with a scraggly beard, moved directly toward Anna, who sat frozen in shock, her colored pencil still poised above her drawing. "Got her," he shouted to his companion. "Get the door." Major launched himself across the kitchen with explosive force, his 80 pounds of muscle and protective fury colliding with the intruder just as his hands reached for Anna. Man and dog crashed to the floor in a chaotic tangle of limbs and snarls, Major's teeth finding purchase in the attacker's forearm, drawing an agonized scream from the would-be abductor. "Shoot the damn dog," the man yelled, struggling to free himself from Major's relentless grip. The second intruder, shorter but more heavily muscled, reached behind his back to withdraw a hunting knife, its blade gleaming in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. "Hold him still," he commanded, advancing on the thrashing pair. Upstairs, Laura heard the commotion with a mother's primal instinct for danger. "Anna," she screamed, dropping the sheets and racing for the staircase. In her haste, her foot caught on the top step, sending her tumbling painfully down the first flight, her ankle twisting with an audible snap. Despite the searing pain, she dragged herself up, crawling and limping toward the sounds of struggle coming from the kitchen. In those same crucial seconds, Anna had recovered from her initial paralysis. With a child's desperate clarity, she saw Major fighting for her life against opponents 3 times his size. The German Shepherd had managed to force the first attacker onto his back, pinning him with the weight of his body, while maintaining his vice-like grip on the man's arm. Blood soaked through the leather sleeve, spattering across the kitchen floor in crimson droplets. The second man circled, knife raised, looking for an opening to strike without endangering his partner. "Get off him, you filthy mutt," he snarled, fanting toward Major's exposed flank. Major, demonstrating an almost uncanny tactical awareness, refused to release his primary target, knowing instinctively that doing so would free the larger threat. Instead, he adjusted his position, using the first attacker as both victim and shield against the man with the knife. Anna's gaze darted wildly around the kitchen, searching for anything to help. Her eyes locked on the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, a safety measure James had insisted upon in every room of the house. With shaking hands, she grabbed it, struggling with its unexpected weight. "Leave my dog alone," she screamed, swinging the extinguisher wildly at the knife wielder's legs. The heavy cylinder connected with his knee, producing a howl of pain and momentarily diverting his attention from Major. That split second was all the German Shepherd needed. With a strategic shift, Major released the first man's arm, only to immediately lunge for his throat, not to kill but to establish dominance and immobilize the greater threat. The move was calculated, precise, the kind of maneuver that spoke to training beyond mere family pet instincts. Get this thing off me." The pinned attacker gasped, true fear replacing anger in his voice as Major's teeth pressed against his jugular with just enough pressure to communicate lethal potential without breaking skin. The second man, limping from Anna's blow but still dangerous, lunged forward with the knife. Major's ears flattened, his body tensing for the impact he couldn't avoid while maintaining his hold on the primary attacker. The kitchen door burst open a third time. Anna's terrified mind registered the gleam of metal, another weapon, she thought before recognizing the ornate belt buckle of Sheriff Reynolds as he crashed into the room, a service weapon drawn. "The police." Dropped the knife. "Now." The sheriff's voice boomed through the kitchen with commanding authority. The knife wielder froze, caught in the classic criminal's dilemma: fight, flee, or surrender. His hesitation lasted only a heartbeat before he made his choice, spinning toward the shattered back door. He never made it. A blur of uniform and determined law enforcement training, Deputy Mark Wilson appeared in the doorframe, tackling the fleeing suspect with textbook precision. The knife clattered across the tile floor as both men went down hard, Mark's handcuffs already out and clicking into place before the attacker could recover his wits. "Don't move," Mark ordered, pressing his knee firmly between the suspect's shoulder blades. For once, his skepticism toward dogs was nowhere in evidence as he shot an appreciative glance toward Major, still holding the first attacker in that carefully controlled throat grip. Sheriff Reynolds moved forward cautiously. "Easy, Major," he said in a calm, controlled voice. "We've got him now, boy." Major's eyes, intelligent and assessing, flicked toward the sheriff without relinquishing his hold. Only when Reynolds knelt beside the pinned attacker with handcuffs at the ready did the German shepherd slowly, reluctantly release his grip, backing toward Anna with his body positioned protectively between her and the subdued threats. Laura finally reached the kitchen doorway, her face white with pain from her injured ankle but relief washing over her features at the sight of Anna unharmed. "Anna. Oh God, Anna," she gasped, holding out her arms. Anna ran to her mother, collapsing into her embrace with deep, shuddering sobs that released all the terror of the past minutes. Major padded after her, his muzzle stained with the attacker's blood, his sides heaving with the exertion of combat, but his bearing still alert, still vigilant. "It's okay, baby," Laura murmured into Anna's hair, one hand reaching to include Major in their embrace. "You're safe. You're both safe." Outside, the wail of approaching sirens announced the arrival of additional law enforcement and emergency services. Through the broken kitchen door came a new figure, tall and imposing in leather cuts emblazoned with patches identifying him as the leader of the motorcycle gang. His face, unlike the others, remained exposed, weathered, scarred, with cold eyes that surveyed the scene with calculated assessment rather than panic. "This isn't over," he stated flatly, his gaze locking with Anna's over her mother's shoulder. "You took something from me once. I don't forget." Sheriff Reynolds stepped forward, his weapon trained on the newcomer. "You're under arrest. Don't make this worse for yourself." The gang leader's lips curled in a dismissive smile. "You have no idea what worse looks like, old man." His eyes flicked to Major, who had positioned himself in front of Anna and Laura, hackles raised, a continuous growl vibrating through his powerful chest. "That dog should have been put down years ago." The words, cryptic and chilling, hung in the air as additional deputies swarmed into the kitchen, securing the gang leader in handcuffs despite his lack of physical resistance. As they led him away, his final glance back at Major carried a weight of personal vendetta that sent ice through Laura's veins. The aftermath unfolded in a blur of activity: paramedics attending to Laura's ankle and the biker's injuries, crime scene technicians photographing the destruction, deputies taking statements. Through it all, Major remained firmly at Anna's side, accepting gentle pats from Sheriff Reynolds and even a grudging nod of respect from Deputy Mark. When James finally arrived home, soot-stained and frantic after hearing the emergency call over the fire department radio, he found Anna sitting on the front porch steps, her arms around Major's neck. The German shepherd's protective stance unchanged despite the chaos of law enforcement activity surrounding them. "Dad," Anna cried, running to him. Major saved us. He fought the bad men." James gathered his daughter in his arms, his eyes meeting Laura's over Anna's head. The look that passed between them contained volumes: guilt for having doubted, gratitude for Major's intervention, and a dawning horror at how close they had come to losing everything that mattered. "I always knew he would," James said, his voice thick with emotion as he reached to include the German shepherd in his embrace. Major leaned into the contact, finally allowing his vigilance to ease slightly in the presence of his family's patriarch. As twilight descended on the shattered piece of the Carter home, Sheriff Reynolds approached with a grim expression. "James, Laura, we need to talk. What happened here today, it wasn't random." "That gang leader, he said something about Major. Something about the past." James frowned, his hand stilling on Major's head. "What do you mean?" "I think," the sheriff said carefully, "there's more to your dog's story than any of us knew." Major's ears perked forward at these words, his amber eyes holding an intelligence, an awareness that suddenly seemed too profound, too knowing for a simple family pet. Whatever secrets lay in his past, they had surfaced now in dramatic fashion, leaving the Carter family teetering between gratitude for their salvation and fear of what revelations might come next. The Carter family was relocated to a hotel on the outskirts of Ridgewood that evening, their home now an active crime scene surrounded by yellow police tape. The suite provided by the sheriff's department offered physical safety, but little emotional comfort, its generic furnishings and sterile atmosphere a stark contrast to the warmth of their violated home. Laura sat on the edge of one twin bed, her sprained ankle professionally wrapped and elevated on a pillow, her face drawn with pain, both physical and psychological. Across from her, James paced the limited floor space, stopping occasionally to check the locks on the windows and doors, a habit from his military days intensified by the day's events. Anna had finally fallen into exhausted sleep in the adjoining room, but only after extracting promises from her parents that Major would not leave her sight. The German shepherd lay across the threshold of her doorway, his posture suggesting rest but his eyes remaining alert, tracking every movement in the main room where the adults spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "The vet should be here by now," Laura whispered, checking her watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. After the attack, Sheriff Reynolds had insisted that Major receive professional medical attention. The dog had sustained injuries that hadn't been immediately apparent in the adrenaline-fueled aftermath: a deep gash along his flank from a glancing blow of the knife, and what appeared to be cracked ribs from the struggle. "He's coming from the next county," James reminded her. "Bill said he's the best emergency veterinarian in the region." A gentle knock at the door sent James hurrying to the peephole, hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he didn't carry. He visibly relaxed at the sight of Sheriff Reynolds' familiar weathered face, quickly undoing the chain and security lock. The sheriff entered, followed by a gray-haired man carrying a medical bag that marked him as the anticipated veterinarian. Major raised his head at their arrival but remained at his post by Anna's door, eyes narrowing slightly at the stranger. "This is Dr. Peterson," Sheriff Reynolds introduced quietly. "He's agreed to come examine Major here rather than transporting him to a clinic." Dr. Peterson nodded in greeting, his experienced gaze already assessing Major from a respectful distance. "That's quite a dog you have there," he commented. "German Shepherd. But I'm seeing some Belgian Malinois characteristics in his build and coloring." James frowned slightly. "The shelter just listed him as a shepherd when I found him." "May I?" the veterinarian asked, gesturing toward Major. At James's nod, he approached slowly, speaking in the gentle, confident tones of a man who understood that injured animals could be unpredictable. Major allowed the examination with stoic dignity, flinching only slightly when the doctor's careful fingers probed his injured side. The process took nearly 20 minutes, during which Sheriff Reynolds drew James and Laura aside to speak privately. "We've identified all 3 men," he informed them grimly. "They're part of a group that calls themselves the Iron Wolves. A nasty piece of work involved in everything from drug trafficking to weapons dealing. But their specialty—" He hesitated, glancing toward Anna's room before continuing in a lower voice. "Their specialty is human trafficking, particularly minors." Laura pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "They were going to take our baby," she whispered. "But they didn't," James reminded her firmly, his arm tightening around her shoulders. Major stopped them. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss," the sheriff continued. "The leader, the one who arrived last, man named Victor Crane, he said something interesting during questioning. Claimed he recognized your dog. Said they had unfinished business." James's expression darkened. "What the hell does that mean?" Before Reynolds could respond, Dr. Peterson approached, wiping his hands on a small towel. "Your dog has 3 cracked ribs and a laceration that required 12 stitches, he reported. "I've treated the wound and wrapped his torso to stabilize the ribs, but he'll need rest and careful monitoring." "Will he be okay?" Laura asked anxiously. "Physically, yes, with proper care," the veterinarian replied. "But there's something else you should know." He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "This dog has had professional training, military or police level. From what I can tell, the scarring under his fur suggests previous injuries consistent with service work. And there's a small area on his shoulder where the fur hasn't grown back completely the right size and location for a removed microchip." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of this information sank in. James was the first to speak, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Are you saying Major was stolen? That he belonged to someone else before I found him?" "It's possible," Dr. Peterson acknowledged. "There are databases we can check for missing service dogs. With your permission, I'd like to take some photographs and measurements." James nodded numbly, struggling to process this revelation. The dog that had saved his family, perhaps his own sanity after returning from war, might have been taken from another handler, another family who had trained and loved him. That might explain Crane's interest, Sheriff Reynolds mused. If Major was originally being transported or held by the Iron Wolves for some reason, and escaped or was lost during the warehouse fire, James finished, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Dr. Peterson cleared his throat. "There's something else. Your dog is showing signs of internal bleeding that concerns me. The knife wound may have nicked something I can't see with my portable equipment. He needs ultrasound imaging and possibly surgery." "Then we'll take him to your clinic right now," James declared. The veterinarian shook his head regretfully. "My facility isn't equipped for this level of trauma care. He needs a specialist, a veterinary surgical center. The nearest one is in Hartfield Memorial Animal Hospital, about 60 miles from here." "Then that's where we'll go," Laura said without hesitation. "There's also the matter of cost," Dr. Peterson added gently. "Emergency veterinary surgery, especially after hours, we're looking at several $1,000s, possibly more depending on what they find." James and Laura exchanged a glance that communicated volumes about their financial situation: the mortgage, Laura's recent unpaid leave to care for her ailing mother, James's firefighter salary that barely covered their existing expenses. "We'll find a way," James said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Sheriff Reynolds offered to escort them to Hartfield, ensuring both their safety and expedited travel through his jurisdictional connections. Within 20 minutes, a sleepy but determined Anna was helping Major into the back of the family's SUV, the German Shepherd moving with the careful, measured pace of an animal in significant pain but refusing to show weakness. The 60-mile drive to Hartfield seemed to stretch into eternity. Major lay across the back seat, his head resting on Anna's lap, his breathing becoming increasingly labored as the miles passed. Twice he attempted to lift his head at the sound of passing motorcycles, his protective instincts overriding his own distress, before settling back against Anna with a soft whine that broke her parents' hearts. "Stay with me, boy," Anna whispered, stroking his fur with trembling fingers. "Please stay with me." Boy. Hartfield Memorial Animal Hospital blazed with light against the darkness, its emergency entrance a beacon of hope as they finally arrived shortly after midnight. A team of veterinary staff rushed out with a stretcher at Sheriff Reynolds' radio alert of their approach, transferring Major with professional efficiency while a sympathetic receptionist ushered the exhausted family into a private waiting room. The next hours blurred together in a haze of paperwork, hushed conversations with medical staff, and the peculiar timelessness of hospital waiting rooms. A kind-faced veterinary surgeon, Dr. Emily Chen, appeared periodically with updates confirming the internal bleeding, explaining the necessary procedures, outlining the risks and potential outcomes with compassionate honesty. "We're doing everything possible," she assured them during her third visit, surgical cap still in place. "But I need to be straightforward with you, his injuries are severe. The knife nicked his spleen, causing slow but significant blood loss. He's also showing signs of previous injuries that complicate matters." "Previous injuries?" James questioned. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "Healed fractures, scar tissue consistent with old bullet-grazing wounds. This dog has been through significant trauma before today. It's actually remarkable he survived this long." As the first light of dawn filtered through the waiting room blinds, Dr. Chen returned, her expression grave. The surgery had been completed, but Major remained in critical condition, requiring blood transfusions and intensive monitoring. "The next 24 hours will be crucial," she explained. "I wish I could give you more definitive news, but at this point it's a waiting game." Then came the moment James had been dreading, the discussion of finances. The hospital administrator arrived with paperwork detailing the costs incurred and estimated additional expenses: emergency surgery, specialist care, medications, and monitoring equipment. Overnight intensive care. The numbers swam before James's eyes, their total surpassing what the family had in savings many times over. "We have payment plans," the administrator offered sympathetically, "but we do require a significant deposit to continue treatment." Laura looked to James, desperation in her eyes. "We could take out a second mortgage," she suggested quietly. James shook his head. The bank would never approve it that quickly. His mind raced through their limited options: credit cards already stretched thin, no family members with funds to spare, Anna's small college fund that they had vowed never to touch. Anna, who had been silently observing this adult conversation from her chair in the corner, suddenly stood. "Use my birthday money," she said firmly, "and sell my bike. And my violin." "Oh, sweetheart," Laura began, her voice catching. "That's not—" "He saved my life," Anna interrupted, tears streaming down her face, but her small chin set with determination. "We can't let him die because of money." James felt something inside him break at his daughter's words. He stepped away from the group, moving to the window that overlooked the hospital parking lot. Dawn light glinted off his truck in the distance, illuminating the firefighter decal on its bumper. In that moment, a solution painful but necessary crystallized in his mind. When he turned back to his family, his decision was made. "Wait here," he instructed, pulling his phone from his pocket as he stepped into the hallway. 20 minutes later he returned, his expression somber but resolved. "The deposit is taken care of," he announced. "How?" Laura asked, knowing their financial situation too well to imagine any easy solution. James couldn't meet her eyes at first. "I called Mike at the pawn shop. He's given me a fair price for my father's medals and my service commendations." Laura gasped softly. Those medals, particularly his father's Silver Star from Vietnam and James's own Purple Heart, were his most treasured possessions, if displayed reverently in a glass case in their living room. They represented not just military achievement, but family legacy, personal sacrifice, honor preserved through generations. "James, no," she protested. "There must be another way." "There isn't," he replied simply. "Not in time. Mike's opening early for me. I'm meeting him in an hour." Anna moved to her father's side, slipping her small hand into his. "The Major would do it for us," she said with the clear, uncomplicated certainty of childhood. James squeezed her hand gently. Yes, he would. As the morning progressed, the Carter family maintained their vigil in the waiting room, each lost in private thoughts. Sheriff Reynolds had returned to Ridgewood to oversee the ongoing investigation but promised to return by evening. The hospital staff provided coffee, juice, and vending machine sandwiches that went largely untouched. At noon, Dr. Chin appeared in the doorway, her surgical scrubs replaced by a clean lab coat, but the fatigue of a long night's work evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. Her expression sent a chill through James before she even spoke. "I'm so sorry," she began, the three words that no one waiting in a hospital ever wants to hear. "Major's condition has deteriorated. The internal bleeding has resumed and his body isn't responding to treatment as we'd hoped. We need to make some difficult decisions." Laura pulled Anna close as the doctor continued, explaining in gentle but clear terms that Major's chances of survival were diminishing rapidly. The damage was too extensive, his body too traumatized by both recent and past injuries. "He's fighting," Dr. Chin said softly, "but he's suffering. At this point, we need to consider what's most humane." The word hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all euthanasia. The merciful release from pain that represented the most devastating kind of loss. "Can we see him?" Anna asked, her voice small but steady. Dr. Chin nodded. "Of course. I'll take you to him now." The intensive care unit of the animal hospital was quiet save for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment and the gentle hum of oxygen machines. Major lay on a padded table, his powerful body now looking somehow diminished, wrapped in bandages and connected to IV lines. His eyes, those intelligent amber windows that had always seemed to understand every word spoken to him, were half closed, dulled with pain and heavy medication. When Anna approached, however, his tail thumped weakly against the table once, twice a shadow of his usual enthusiastic greeting but unmistakable in its meaning. Recognition. Love. Loyalty to the end. "Hey boy," Anna whispered, carefully touching his head, avoiding the tubes and wires that surrounded him. "You're the bravest dog in the whole world." Major's eyes focused on her face with visible effort, his expression containing such profound devotion that Laura had to turn away, her hand pressed to her mouth to stifle a sob. James stood at the foot of the table, his hands gripping the metal frame until his knuckles whitened. The decision before them was unbearable, yet leaving Major to suffer would be even more so. "What do we do?" he asked Dr. Chin, his voice barely audible. Before she could answer, Major made a tremendous effort, raising his head slightly toward Anna, his eyes suddenly clearer and more focused, as if gathering his remaining strength for one final act of protection, ensuring his family could see that he recognized them, that he wasn't afraid, that he understood. In that moment, surrounded by the sterile equipment of veterinary medicine, the Carter family faced their darkest hour, the potential loss of the guardian who had saved them in more ways than they could count, and the realization that sometimes love meant making the most painful choice of all. The somber silence in the veterinary hospital room was broken by the sudden sound of the door swinging open. Sheriff Reynolds stood in the doorway, breathing heavily as if he'd been running. "Don't make any decisions yet," he said urgently, gesturing to someone in the hallway behind him. A middle-aged man in a crisp military uniform stepped into the room, his bearing ramrod straight despite evident fatigue. The insignia on his uniform identified him as a colonel in the United States Army. "This is Colonel Robert Hargrove," Sheriff Reynolds explained. "Military police. He drove straight from Fort Benning after I sent him Major's description and photos." Colonel Hargrove moved to the examination table, his eyes widening as he looked at the injured German shepherd. "My God," he whispered, "it really is him, after all this time." "You know our dog?" James asked, confusion momentarily overriding his grief. The colonel nodded gravely. "Not your dog, exactly, though it's clear he's become that." He reached out a tentative hand toward Major, whose eyes flickered with what might have been recognition. "This is Sergeant Rex, one of our most decorated military working dogs. He disappeared 3 years ago during a training transport. We believed he was dead." Anna looked up, her tear-stained face registering shock. "Major's real name is Rex?" "His service name, yes," Hargrove confirmed. "He specialized in explosives detection and personal protection. One of the finest animals ever to serve." He turned to Dr. Chen. "What's his prognosis?" The veterinarian shook her head regretfully. "Critical. Internal bleeding, trauma, previous injuries complicating current ones. We were just discussing end-of-life options." Colonel Hargrove's face hardened with sudden resolve. "Not yet, you're not." He pulled out his phone and stepped slightly away from the group, speaking in rapid, authoritative tones to someone on the other end. "There's a military veterinary surgical team at Fort Benning," he explained upon returning. "Specialists in treating combat dogs with battlefield injuries. I've just received authorization to transfer him to our facility immediately at government expense. We have blood banks specifically for military working dogs and experimental treatments not available to civilian vets." Hope, that most dangerous of emotions when standing on the precipice of loss, flickered in the Carter's eyes. "You can save him?" Anna asked, her small voice trembling. "I can't promise that," Colonel Hargrove replied honestly. "But I can promise he'll receive the best care available anywhere in the country. He's still Army property, technically, which means the military will cover all expenses." Laura squeezed James's arm. "How soon can he be moved?" "We have a medical transport helicopter landing in 20 minutes, the colonel replied. "If Dr. Chen approves the transfer protocols." While the medical teams prepared Major for transport, Sheriff Reynolds pulled James and Laura aside, his weathered face grave. "There's something else you need to know," he said quietly. "We've been interrogating the men from yesterday's attack. The gang leader, Crane, finally started talking after we showed him photos of Major. Turns out there's a connection we never could have imagined." "What kind of connection?" James asked warily. 3 years ago, Crane and his gang were contracted to hijack a military transport carrying equipment and working dogs. They succeeded, taking 3 highly trained dogs valued at over $100,000 each. 2 were sold on the black market to private security firms overseas. And the 3rd was Major, Laura guessed, the pieces falling into place. Reynolds nodded. "But according to Crane, Rex or Major attacked him during the hijacking, nearly tore his throat out before escaping into the woods. Crane has a distinctive scar on his neck from the incident. He's been hunting for the dog ever since, partly for revenge, partly because an animal with that training is extremely valuable." "But how did he find us?" James asked, his military training automatically assessing security threats. "Your firefighter profile on the Ridgewood Township website," Reynolds replied grimly. "It mentions how you rescued a German shepherd from a warehouse fire. They've been monitoring local news and social media for years, looking for any sign of a shepherd with distinctive training behaviors. When they saw the article about you and Major from last year's county fair demonstration, they found him," James finished, a chill running down his spine as he realized how long they had been watched, evaluated, targeted. "And Anna?" Laura whispered, her face pale. "Why target our daughter?" Reynolds hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Leverage. They planned to take Anna to force you to surrender the dog. But they also," he trailed off, unwilling to articulate the full horror of the Iron Wolves' secondary business. "My God," Laura breathed, understanding without needing the words spoken aloud. She gripped James's arm so tightly her knuckles whitened. A commotion down the hallway interrupted their grim conversation. The doors at the end of the corridor burst open as Frank Miller rushed in, his normally hostile expression replaced by one of desperate urgency. "Where's the dog?" he demanded, spotting the Carter family. "I need to see him before they take him." James stepped forward defensively. "What are you doing here, Frank?" Frank held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Please, I know I have no right, but I have to see him. I have to apologize." The raw emotion in the man's voice gave James pause. Sheriff Reynolds nodded almost imperceptibly, indicating it was safe to allow him through. Frank approached the room where medical staff were preparing Major for transport. At the sight of the injured German Shepherd, all color drained from his face. "It's true," he whispered. "It's really him." Anna looked up sharply. "You know Major, too?" Frank's eyes filled with tears, shocking on the face of a man known throughout Ridgewood for his bitter stoicism. "Not as Major," he said hoarsely. "The Army called him Rex. But before that, when he was just a puppy in the military breeding program, my son called him Scout." The revelation landed like a thunderclap in the small room. Frank sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping under an invisible weight. "My son Michael was a dog handler in the Army," he explained, his voice catching. "He was assigned a puppy to raise and train from the military breeding program, this puppy." He gestured toward Major. "They were inseparable for 8 months. Then Michael was deployed to Afghanistan while Scout Rex continued his training stateside. When Michael was killed by an IED, I couldn't bear anything that reminded me of him." Understanding dawned in James's eyes. "Your campaign against dogs in Ridgewood, it wasn't because of some childhood attack." And Frank shook his head miserably. "There was no attack. It was a lie I told to justify my crusade. The truth was too painful. When I first saw your dog around town, he reminded me so much of Scout that I couldn't stand it. Then when he started showing protective behaviors, military training responses, I began to suspect. But I couldn't face the possibility." "So you tried to have him banned," Laura said, comprehension replacing anger in her voice. "I was wrong," Frank admitted, his voice breaking. "So terribly wrong. When I heard what happened yesterday, how he saved Anna, it's what Michael would have wanted. His dog still protecting the innocent." He looked up, his eyes filled with decades of unresolved grief. "I had to come tell you the truth." As Frank spoke, Principal Margaret Thompson appeared in the doorway, her customary severe bun disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed behind her glasses. "I came as soon as I heard," she said. "I had to explain, to apologize." Sheriff Reynolds's expression hardened. "Mrs. Thompson, this isn't the best time." "No, they need to hear this," she insisted, stepping further into the already crowded room. "The school ban wasn't just about parental complaints. I was being blackmailed." "Blackmailed?" Laura repeated, stunned. Principal Thompson nodded miserably. "Victor Crane approached me 3 weeks ago. He had photos compromising pictures of my daughter in Millfield. She struggled with addiction for years. He threatened to send them to the school board, the local paper. She swallowed hard. All I had to do was find a reason to keep the Carter dog away from the school. I didn't understand why until now." The weight of these revelations settled over the room. A conspiracy spanning years, motivated by vengeful obsession, grief-driven hatred, and exploitation of personal weakness, all converging around one extraordinary dog now fighting for his life. Outside, the rhythmic thump of helicopter blades announced the arrival of the military medical transport. Colonel Hargrove stepped forward, returning the conversation to the immediate crisis. "It's time," he said simply. "The surgical team is standing by at Fort Benning." As the medical staff prepared to move Major, Anna placed her hand gently on the German Shepherd's head. "His name isn't really Major or Rex or Scout," she said with a child's clear certainty. "His real name is Hero. Because that's what he is." No one contradicted her. The military transport team worked with swift efficiency, transferring Major to their specialized equipment. Before they wheeled him toward the helipad, Colonel Hargrove faced the Carter family. "Army regulations are clear," he said formally. "As a recovered military asset, Sergeant Rex should be returned to service or, given his injuries, retired to the military working dog adoption program." He paused, looking at Anna's tear-stained face, then at James's firefighter uniform still stained with soot from yesterday's brush fire. "However, there are exceptions for extraordinary circumstances and individuals who have demonstrated exceptional service to their country." He withdrew a document from his inside jacket pocket. "This is a specialized adoption form, pre-signed by my commanding officer. Once he's stabilized, if he stabilizes, he's yours legally. The Army recognizes that he's found his permanent post." James accepted the document with trembling hands. "Thank you, Colonel." "Don't thank me," Hargrove replied. "From what I've heard, that dog has earned his retirement several times over." He glanced at his watch. "You should come with us to Fort Benning. There's room on the helicopter, and you'll want to be there, whatever happens." As they followed the gurney toward the helipad, Deputy Mark Wilson arrived, nearly colliding with them in the hallway. "Laura, James, I came as soon as my shift ended." His eyes widened at the military presence, the medical equipment, the somber faces. "What's happening?" "It's a long story," Laura told her brother wearily. "One you might not believe." Mark's gaze fell on Major's still form being loaded onto the helicopter. The deputy who had delivered the school band, who had doubted Anna's fears, who had always been skeptical of dangerous animals in residential neighborhoods, suddenly looked stricken. "Is he going to make it?" he asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. "We don't know yet," James answered honestly. "But he's got the best possible chance now." As the Carter family boarded the helicopter, the unlikely assemblage of supporters, Sheriff Reynolds, Deputy Wilson, Principal Thompson, Frank Miller, and Dr. Chen stood watching from the hospital entrance. Each had played a role in the unfolding drama, some unwittingly serving the schemes of the Iron Wolves, others allowing personal biases to cloud their judgment. Yet all were now united in hope for the dog who had exposed a criminal network, reunited a grieving man with his son's legacy, and saved a little girl from unimaginable fate. The helicopter lifted off, carrying Major, or Rex, or Scout, or as Anna had named him, Hero, toward either salvation or a peaceful end. His story still unfinished, but his impact on Ridgewood already indelible. The truth of his past had finally emerged, not erasing the bond he had formed with the Carter family, but deepening it with layers of meaning and purpose none of them could have imagined on that stormy night 6 years ago when James carried a smoke-stained puppy from a burning warehouse. In that moment of ascension, as Ridgewood fell away beneath them and the hospital helipad became a shrinking circle on the landscape below, Anna pressed her face against the helicopter window, her lips moving in a silent prayer for the guardian who had always protected her, and who now needed her strength in return. The Specialized Veterinary Treatment Center at Fort Benning presented a stark contrast to the civilian animal hospital they had left behind. Military efficiency permeated every aspect of the facility, from the precisely organized medical equipment to the disciplined movements of the staff in their crisp uniforms. For 3 days, the Carter family maintained a vigil in a small waiting area designated for families of K-9 handlers, watching as a rotating team of military veterinary specialists fought to save Major's life. The first 24 hours had been the most precarious. Twice Major's vital signs had plummeted to crisis levels, and twice the surgical team had managed to stabilize him. The lead veterinarian, Major Sarah Donovan, emerged from the treatment area at regular intervals to provide updates, her professional demeanor softening when addressing Anna directly. "He's responding to the blood transfusions," she reported on the morning of the 3rd day, allowing herself a cautious smile. "And the specialized antibiotics appear to be controlling the infection. His latest scans show the internal bleeding has stopped completely." "Does that mean he'll be okay?" Anna asked, the dark circles under her eyes testament to her refusal to leave the facility, even to sleep at the nearby accommodations offered to her parents. "It means," Dr. Donovan replied carefully, "that for the first time since you arrived, I'm optimistic about his chances. Your dog is a fighter, young lady. One of the strongest I've ever seen." As Major's condition gradually improved, Colonel Hargrove arranged for the Carter family to meet with individuals connected to their dog's extraordinary past. Sergeant Michael Torres, a former handler who had worked with Rex during training exercises, shared stories of the German Shepherd's remarkable intelligence and unwavering focus. He could clear a building faster than any dog in the unit, Torres recalled, seated with the family in the small garden area outside the veterinary facility. And his scent detection abilities were off the charts. But what made Rex special wasn't just his skills, it was his judgment. He somehow knew the difference between a genuine threat and a benign situation. That's rare, even in the best military working dogs. James nodded, recognition flickering in his eyes. He's always been that way with Anna, extraordinarily protective but never aggressive without cause. That's Rex, Torres confirmed. Or Major, as you call him. Some dogs are trained, but a few are born with a kind of wisdom that can't be taught. He's one of those. On the fourth day, when Major was finally deemed stable enough for short visits, Anna was the first allowed into his recovery kennel. The German Shepherd lay on a padded bed, various monitoring devices attached to his body and an IV line delivering fluids and medication. His midsection was heavily bandaged, and a special protective collar had been fitted to prevent him from disturbing his sutures. Yet despite these medical encumbrances, his eyes brightened visibly when Anna entered, and his tail protruding from beneath a light blanket thumped weakly against the bedding. Major, Anna whispered, kneeling beside him and gently pressing her forehead to his. I knew you'd stay with me. Over the following weeks, Major's recovery progressed with the same determination that characterized everything about him. The military veterinarians marveled at his resilience, particularly given his age and the extent of his injuries. What might have been a death sentence for most dogs became, for this extraordinary animal, simply another battle to be won through sheer force of will. He shouldn't be improving this quickly, Dr. Donovan admitted to James and Laura during the third week. By all medical logic, the combination of internal trauma, blood loss, and previous injuries should have resulted in a much longer recovery period, if recovery was possible at all. But he seems determined to defy our expectations. He has something to live for, Laura said, simply watching through the observation window as Anna read aloud from her favorite book to the attentive German Shepherd. The sight of her daughter, so recently threatened, now safely engaged in such a normal activity, brought tears to her eyes. They both do. As Major's physical condition improved, the legal aspects of his situation were formalized. Colonel Hargrove personally oversaw the completion of adoption paperwork, officially transferring the military working dog to civilian status and permanent placement with the Carter family. Ordinarily, there would be a waiting list of handlers and veterans hoping to adopt a dog with his training and background, Hargrove explained, signing the final documents. But given the circumstances and his clear bond with your family, this is clearly where he belongs. Meanwhile, in Ridgewood, the repercussions of the Iron Wolves' failed abduction attempt continued to ripple through the community. Sheriff Reynolds kept the Carters updated through regular phone calls, describing how the investigation had expanded to include federal agencies after the connection to the military dog theft was established. Victor Crane and his top lieutenants are facing multiple federal charges, the sheriff reported. The evidence we found in their temporary base outside town has linked them to trafficking operations in 3 states. They won't be seeing daylight for decades, if ever. Principal Margaret Thompson had submitted her resignation to the school board, her complicity in the blackmail scheme making her position untenable despite the extenuating circumstances. However, in an unexpected demonstration of forgiveness, Laura Carter had spoken at the emergency board meeting, describing Thompson's actions as those of a desperate mother rather than a willing accomplice. She made a terrible choice for what she thought were the right reasons, protecting her daughter, Laura had argued. As a mother, I understand that impulse, even if I cannot condone her actions. The board had consequently allowed Thompson to retire rather than face dismissal, a small mercy that acknowledged her 30 years of otherwise exemplary service to Ridgewood's children. Frank Miller, perhaps transformed most profoundly by the events, had embarked on a personal mission of atonement. Upon learning that the Carter home still bore the damage from the break-in, he had organized a volunteer repair effort, bringing together carpenters, electricians, and other skilled workers from throughout Ridgewood to restore and improve the family's residence before their return. It's the least I can do, he explained gruffly when James called to thank him. My boy Michael would have wanted it this way. By the 6th week, Major had progressed to short, controlled walks around the facility grounds, his gait still careful but steadily regaining strength. The surgical team had prepared a comprehensive rehabilitation plan, including exercises designed to rebuild muscle without stressing his healing ribs and internal injuries. Most significantly, they had cleared him for transport back to Ridgewood, deeming him stable enough to continue his recovery at home under the care of a local veterinarian. The day of their departure from Fort Benning dawned clear and bright, the October sun casting long shadows across the parade ground as a small contingent of military personnel gathered to bid farewell to one of their own. Colonel Hargrove presided over a brief but moving ceremony, presenting Major or Sergeant Rex, as he was addressed for this final military function with the Army Commendation Medal for his service. Though unable to complete his official duties due to circumstances beyond his control, Hargrove read from the citation, Sergeant Rex demonstrated exceptional courage, loyalty, and dedication to the protection of civilians, values that exemplify the highest traditions of military service. The medal was affixed to a special collar that Major would wear for ceremonial occasions, but replacing the military working dog vest he had never actually served in but had been created in his honor. Anna accepted the folded American flag that traditionally accompanied such commendations, her small face solemn with the weight of the moment. As the Carter family prepared to board the military transport vehicle that would take them to the civilian airport, Dr. Donovan approached with final instructions and medications. He'll need continued rest and careful monitoring, she cautioned. No strenuous activity for at least another month. And he'll always have some limitations. The damage to his left hind leg means he'll likely develop arthritis earlier than most dogs his age. He'll have everything he needs, James promised, helping Major gently into the specially padded carrier. One more thing, Dr. Donovan added, her professional demeanor softening. The physical scars will heal faster than the psychological ones. He may experience heightened protective behaviors, anxiety in certain situations. Be patient with him. Laura nodded, recognizing in the veterinarian's advice a parallel to what they had once been told about James's PTSD after his return from Iraq. We understand traumatic responses in our house, she said quietly. He'll have all the time and support he needs. The return to Ridgewood felt like emerging from a long tunnel into unexpected sunlight. As the Carter's car turned onto Maple Street, they were greeted by the sight of neighbors lining the sidewalks, many holding hand-painted welcome signs. A large banner stretched across the front of their repaired home read, "Welcome Home," heroes in colorful letters that Anna immediately recognized as the handiwork of her third-grade class. Sheriff Reynolds stood at the foot of their driveway alongside Deputy Mark Wilson, Frank Miller, and dozens of community members whose perception of a dangerous dog had been transformed by the truth of Major's actions. As James helped the still recovering German Shepherd from the car, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the gathered crowd, causing Major's ears to perk forward with alert interest. "Easy, boy," James murmured. "These are all friends." The weeks that followed brought a gradual return to normalcy, albeit a new normal shaped by their shared trauma and revelations. Major's physical recovery continued steadily under the watchful care of Dr. Wilson, the local veterinarian who had been thoroughly briefed by the military medical team. Though the German Shepherd would never regain the full athleticism of his youth or training days, his determination enabled him to overcome limitations that might have permanently disabled another dog. Most significantly, the school board had not only rescinded the ban against Major but had instituted a new policy allowing him special dispensation to accompany Anna to and from school. The sight of the German Shepherd, now sporting a special service dog vest created by the town's seamstress, waiting patiently at the school gates, once again became a familiar and welcome part of Ridgewood's daily rhythm. 1 year to the day after the attempted abduction, the Carter family gathered in their backyard for a quiet celebration of what they had come to call their survival anniversary. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the apple pie cooling on the kitchen windowsill. James, finally at peace with selling his medals, had found unexpected solace in the knowledge that his father's military honors had helped save a fellow soldier of sorts. Laura, inspired by their experiences, had developed an animal therapy program at the elementary school, bringing carefully selected shelter dogs to interact with children struggling with emotional or learning challenges. And Anna, now 10 years old and wiser in ways no child should have to be, sat on the porch steps with her arm draped over Major's shoulders, the German shepherd resting comfortably against her side. Though a slight hitch remained in his gait and silver had begun to appear around his muzzle, his amber eyes remained alert and watchful, ever the guardian even in moments of tranquility. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" Laura asked, joining her daughter on the steps. Anna considered the question, her fingers gently stroking Major's fur. "I was thinking about names," she replied. "How Major has had so many. Scout when he was a puppy, Rex when he was in the Army, Major when he came to us." "And Hero," James reminded her, recalling her declaration at the hospital. Anna nodded, a small smile lighting her face as she pressed her cheek against Major's head. "But I think his real name is Friend," she said simply, "because that's what matters most." As if in agreement, Major sighed contentedly, his warm presence a living reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary heroes come into our lives in the most ordinary disguises, and the deepest loyalties are formed in the crucible of shared adversity. In the peaceful backyard of a small town that had learned the true meaning of protection, a family and their remarkable dog had found not just safety but something far more precious, the unbreakable bond of belonging, exactly where and with whom they were always meant to be. In the twilight of our lives, we recognize that what truly matters isn't the strength of our bodies, but the loyalty in our hearts. Major's story reminds us that sometimes our greatest protectors come in unexpected forms, and that wisdom can be found in trusting our instincts and the instincts of those who love us unconditionally. As we age, we often worry about becoming burdens rather than guardians. Yet Major, even injured and aging, never stopped watching over his family. His devotion transcended his limitations, just as our love for our families transcends our own. The most profound connections in life aren't diminished by time or hardship, they're strengthened. Like James finding purpose in sacrificing his medals, we discover that what we thought defined us is merely a symbol of something deeper within. Remember, a life well lived isn't measured by years or accolades, but by the lives we've touched and protected. In your golden years, you remain as essential to your loved ones as Major was to Anna, irreplaceable, cherished, and profoundly needed. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.